Alright, so peace of mind, what else? What else can be mental health?
I think being able to do life despite circumstances.
Okay.
Being able to get through.
Okay, sure. Okay. As students, what would be some hurdles to your mental health? When would you know that something is going bad, you're not feeling okay? What happens? Any telltale signs? Yes.
When you're not able to focus on something.
Okay. Something about concentration? Yes.
Eating disorders.
Okay. Eating goes bad, sure. Sleeping? Okay. Mood? Not feeling good about ourselves. Let's be more LUMS specific. What are you guys holding about LUMS? I know that there's always a lot of stuff. What's bothering you about your being here? So, for example, the gentleman talked about the experience of being a hostelite and how there's something about that. Is there anything else in your community?
Not fulfilling your commitments and the deadlines and also meeting people.
Okay.
So when you stop doing that.
Something about your academic goals, academic deadlines, what else? Yes.
Some very few people have a tendency to be extremely toxic around this campus.
Okay. And how does that affect us when there are some toxic people around us?
Just for me, it just gives me a lot of anxiety and it just affects my general performance.
Sure. Yes. Okay.
Social life, how you deal with it? In a way, sometimes you want to be quite social, then there are times when you just hate your friends and hate everybody, just want to isolate yourself.
Okay.
How do you negotiate between those phases?
Okay. There's an elephant in the room. I think somewhere, what I was hoping someone would say is that when the cost of mental health disturbances is actually devastating and very visible, you'll all know someone or the other who's lost their life. You'll all know someone or the other who's either overdosed or could have. You'll all know someone who's dropped out of college or hasn't been able to attend this semester. So let's talk about that. Some of these could be your friends, and I think that if we can learn, just like you said, some early identification signs, then maybe there are things you could have done to help your friends. So let's try to talk about some of these things. So one thing that we've even as a community of psychologists we've really debated is that what is mental health to start with, and in a room full of 600 or 800 psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, you put them together and ask them, they'll really not have a good definition because we don't have one. There's a lot of disagreement over that. Is it achievement? But then we have a lot of extremely mentally disturbed individuals who are very high functioning. They can just do work. They may be dying of an alcohol problem, but work-wise they're just fine. There's no issue. So it's been bits and pieces of what can be considered to be mental health, but there's some understanding that mental health has to do with how we regulate our energy. And how we regulate our relationships and how we regulate our own emotional inner life. And when this process is disbalanced, it affects these very things, which is we're unable to control our own selves, we're unable to control our relationships with other people, and then that energy system fails. In some energy systems, which may tend to be depleted, we may identify as more depressive feelings in systems which are too excitable, such as if someone has been through life circumstances, which just the gentleman who had asked about what if we face some circumstances which continue to come back, the excitation of that just continues to hit us over and over again and we're unable to recover from it. So somewhere where we're talking about these two systems, how energy and how our emotional life is regulated within ourselves, outside of us. An overall understanding is that mental health, when we talk about mental health, we also talk about health. Now that may be a very simplistic statement, but we've gotten to there and we're with a lot of trouble, because somewhere there's been a duality in that, which is that there's one that's the body, and then there's the other, which is the mind. And where the body is and where the mind is, and both of these are separate systems. If you're sick, if you have a flu, if you have something else, that's a problem in the body. And if you're depressed and if you're anxious, that's a problem in your mind. But over the past 10-20 years, there's been a lot of understanding about this, that when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about health. It's one and the same thing. The body and the brain, the body creates the brain and the brain creates the body. A bad body means a bad brain, and a bad brain means a bad body. Every day we lose hundreds and billions of our neurons, we lose cells in the body, and hundreds and millions of these are recreated. The more depleted your mind is, the more depleted your body will recreate itself, and the more depleted your body is what feeds your mind. So I would hope that in today's session I can also just slightly also start talking about other things which create the body apart from just our thoughts and our friends and our academics, and that's a very valued area within the mental health sciences. So where we're looking at more holistic systems of healing. In the past 2 decades, we have moved from understanding that, oh, it's just the brain or the biology of that brain, or it's just maybe our thoughts and we can change just the thoughts and everything changes, or well, the problem is the behavior, and if we change the behavior everything else will fall into line. Somewhere we have in psychology through the decades experimented with a lot of these ideas. I mean, there's been early 1900s for the next 4 decades we just had the psychoanalytic and the deeper stuff. We thought that, oh, the deeper stuff is what matters, and then in the 50s and the 60s we thought that it's all about behaviors. You change the behaviors and everything has changed, or you change the thoughts and everything's changed. And then in the last 2 decades we've been moving towards a lot of integrationalism and holism, that you can't really be looking at one without the other, and you're looking at interconnected systems and complex systems. And that's where a lot of my understanding about psychology, behavior, and mental health comes from. That it's anything simplistic never explains it. That's where I am actually with it. So I thought that I'll focus on a couple of things regarding mental health, which is based on this, that we do know that, just like someone said, that there are always some things that may be leading up to a more serious condition. Although there are a lot of mental health disorders which may just come in without really knocking the door, and it's a surprise and a shock for family that, oh, this kid was just okay, and they were just giving their exams, and they were just going to school, and they just had friends, and now they're just completely dysfunctional. We don't know how it happened. That's always a possibility, but more often than not, we usually have things that are leading up to it. Now, what are these things? And you as students, if you're wondering that about your own self or friends or the LUMS community in general, I'm going to focus on some of these preventative factors, rather than when most of the people who are coming to people like me are actually coming for interventions. The shit has already happened. We're already dysfunctional. We're already suicidal. We're already aggrieved. We're already just not motivated to study. We're already failing. That's usually the point that people are seeking help. But in investigating that, we usually always find that developmentally there's a long trail up to those to where they are today. So that's one of the lens that I have, and I'm going to share quickly one of the works that me and my colleague have been very interested in the recent months, which was a qualitative analysis of a lot of our work, which between me and my colleague Mariam, that's around 10,000 hours of our clinical work. So we were just asking that simple question, which is that in hearing from people over so many hours, we're really in the profession of professionally listening to people. Every day, I think on an average, a therapist is listening to people for 6 or 7 or 8 hours of their time. And then most of the stuff is which we'll never be sharing with anyone. It's obviously confidential. So weeks and months and years into it, we ask that question, what have we learned about people's lives? And some of the very strong things which are equally supported by the psychological literature as well as our own work here in this culture seem to be that, well, a lot of what later on develops is a function of certain things. And these things can be, for example, the genetics and the biology. These things can be the social and the cultural and the familial, and these things are then also the environmental. You'd have a lot of times 2 kids in the same family who have been through the same family environment, who've been through the same systems of neglect or abuse or trauma, but one of them will go on to develop a psychological condition and another may not develop that. Now, how do we explain that? And a lot of times we are very accustomed to having people in our offices who say, why is this happening to me? I thought that everything was fine, and I've never thought that this could have happened to me. I would have thought that this happens to other people, and I didn't know that it could also happen to me. We're also considering biological aspects to our behavior, and when I say biological aspects to our behavior, we're looking at your genetics, we're looking at your neurodevelopment. So it's known that the environment of the womb during the most critical years of a child's development, if a child is oxygen deprived, that can affect their brain development, and that could be related to learning disabilities such as autism, autism spectrum disorders. Likewise, there are a lot of other factors which are known to biologically, such as the very construction of the nervous system and the very neurotransmitters that exist in our brain. These things are very powerful factors, and these can contribute towards people's experience of what they're finding to be intolerable, that something is happening outside of me and I don't know how to deal with it. So before we look at any other factors, there's at least a possibility that there could be some things that are biologically driven. Over that, if you add that layer of social and emotional causes, we have a lot of emphasis in the present day. There's been a renewed interest, in the attachment aspects to our adult lives. That what is happening in our lives in the first 3 to 5 years of our lives. Were we being taken care of? Was someone attending to us? Were we neglected? Was the environment of the house safe? Were there rampant use of substances around us? Where the child may have experienced insafety, or where they may have experienced parents who didn't make sense? Were there too many kids in the family? If there were, sometimes it's a cliche for us where someone says, oh, by the way, I had 5 siblings, and I was the one who was always forgotten. कभी motorway पे कहीं मुझे भूल गए थे, 5 मिनट बाद याद आया कि उस बच्चे को भूल गए थे. These are real stories where a child is literally just not there, or they may say that, oh, I was the 5th child and I was never in the pictures, because on the other side of reality, there was a parent who was obviously very busy with the rest of the kids and they never attended to this kid. And 20 years later, this kid has serious problems in forming attachments with other people. And now where is their thinking, oh, everything went fine for me. I aced in my school, I have friends and I have a career, I have these things, everything's fine, but why do I have this trouble? Why am I so troubled? And a lot of times, and again, that's the sort of work that really interests me, that we're looking into those deeper causes. And in the last 2 decades, there's been a lot of renewed interest in psychology, in these developmental and the attachment frameworks that we all come from. We do all come from some form of caregiving setups. That doesn't always need to be parents. It could be grandparents. It could be institutional care. Wherever it is, it seems like that has an effect. And sometimes that, if that effect is negative, if that is neglectful, if that is abusive, that is known to affect the very quality of the brain that develops. And that very quality of the brain is what you and I will now be living with. So while we say that why can't I behave in a normal way? Why do I continue to face this problem? There is a possibility that your brain has developed in that manner. And that's not, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it, but that means that where you are right now, a damage has been done. And where you are, and if you're not going to do anything about it, there's a possibility that without doing anything about it, it's not just going to change by itself. Your brain is set. So, and there's been a lot of emphasis in the recent decades on the impact of trauma. Trauma is known to stop the development of the brain in a certain manner, where that experience of passing through something may be so devastating that the impact of that could be lifelong for individuals. Why that has not caught a lot of our attention has to do with a very different factor, which is that through the first time that the trauma was studied was in the Vietnam War. And we saw as a psychological community that the soldiers who came back, they displayed signs of coming back into civilian life and just not settling down. But the US military did not want that to be studied because that would have lowered the morale of their soldiers. So that was never taken very seriously. But within the psychological community, we were still very interested in it. The US continued to go to wars. The Veterans Association continued to put that argument down that we're not too interested in this. This may be explainable through other means. There must be some other explanation, but by 1980s and 90s it could not be disregarded. And that's where in the last at least 30 years we know that trauma is possibly one of the biggest causes of mental health disturbances. And when I say trauma does not mean you're thinking that something very extreme. Trauma means that something I can't cope with, something that overwhelmed my senses. If I were around parents who were intoxicated and I couldn't deal with that, that may be traumatizing for me. If I were around a society where, or a school where I was bullied and no one attended to me and there was insafety and I worried about it and I lost my sleep over it and that disrupted my experience as a child, that's traumatizing. So trauma is something very subjective. Trauma is not a bomb blast or something graphic. Trauma is something that overwhelms my senses, that I as an individual organism cannot cope with my environment, and that has deeper impact on our brain. And in the later years when I'm trying to, as an adult, face the world, I'm unable to because my brain just doesn't support me in that. So those have been some of the useful leads that in the recent years, decades, we've been interested in, that what are the social, emotional, environmental and the biological aspects of behavior. Psychology at this point is very interested in an integrationalist approach to understanding this very psychopathology. Because if we look at any of these singular causes of something and we ignore the others, they apply on some cases and they don't apply to other cases. So I come from that tradition where we've been taught that every new client is a new diagnosis altogether. You cannot take a person and actually apply a body of whatever 100,000 people's information on that person and try to fix them. Actually, it has to be the other way around. Rather than the top-down approach, it's got to be the down-up approach, that you are building literally a new hypothesis for every person, that what must have caused where they are. And that's where we're working from. So why I'm saying a lot of this for you is to not only identify but to appreciate that mental health is a very complex developing process, and it's subjective. And a lot of times you would be told that, oh, but that person had it worse than you, or your sister or brother had it worse than you. Why are you so affected by it? Or well, you were much older. Look at your younger sibling; they must have had it worse. It's not about it. That's not even helpful, because it's always through the individual's perspective that we're looking at the impact of the environment, and we're always looking at from the individual's perspective when we're looking at the genetic gifts that they carry, the environment, and all the other determinants of that. So. Yes, and I think that there's been this. That's also that's not a very often discussed topic, but also the incidence of substance use. That substance use is very deeply connected with mental health issues. We may believe that nicotine is just nicotine. It comes in a fancy pack, and you can go and buy it at a shop, and it looks cool when you smoke. But it's a very powerful substance, and it very powerfully affects your brain. And here's the evidence of it, that as soon as I'm saying it, smokers right now are craving it. And they're just thinking, well, how can I step out? That's the power of that substance, which is that while you may have stepped in here to actually gain something from this, and that was something you wanted, but as soon as that substance trigger comes in, that all just is washed down the toilet. So, I think somewhere in that understanding of mental health, I think that mixes incomplete if you're not looking at the incidence of substances. And equally, I think that in the last 2 decades, we've even started looking at the incidence of climate change, the environmental toxins. So we've been very interested in environmental toxins like lead, and carbon monoxide, which could be related with the development of a lot of anxiety conditions. And there's a lot of body of research about that would seem to indicate the same. So those are some of the things that in my head makes sense when I am trying to hypothesize that what's causing this cluster of issues. Someone is just coming in. Let me give you an example. Someone comes in and they say, well, I'm not focusing on my work. I used to be interested, but lately I've not been feeling too good about myself. I've not been feeling too good about people I meet, and nothing has happened recently. Nothing's changed recently. I haven't really, there's been no, I may check that has something drastic happened. Have you moved cities? Have you lost friends? How are your relationships? Has something troubling happened lately? And they may say no. And my lens then is to actually just really open up that debate that what could it be? Could it be something genetic? Could it be something biological? Can it be something neurodevelopmental? I'm very interested in the first 3 years of their lives. I'm very interested in where they bullied as a child. I'm very interested in the younger years. 12 to 24 is what we call young adulthood now, because we understand that neurodevelopmentally that's an extremely important phase of one's life. Over the time, we really thought that, oh, this is teenage and stupid behavior, and you're being reckless, and you're just being irreverent to authority figures, and you're just being annoying, and you're just being distant from us. But now we understand that there is a very important function of that, which is that the brain is really developing. It has those billions of parts of connections which need to be eventually trimmed down, and they need to be trimmed down to what you will call your adult personality. This is one of those things when you talk to someone older and they say, oh, by the way, why don't you change? And they're like, nahin, ab hum boode ho gaye, ab hum nahi change ho sakte. What they're referring to, and if you were to speak to someone your age, you're like, how would you like to, I don't know, get rid of your hair or just get it colored in some other color? Or how would you like to go to the other corner of the world and take a trip that is a one-way trip? And you're like, yes, I want to do that. Why you can do that and someone much older won't be able to do that is because there is a pruning process going on in your brain, and by the time you're 24, the brain has gone to what we probably in our language could call therao. Once that therao comes, you can be stable. But especially at this age, and as LUMS students, maybe this is one thing I can connect with your experience at university, and I definitely I was in the same school as you. I can identify that there were a lot of very tough times, and why those tough times are so tough now, so many years later, I can just look back and just feel that was stupid. Why was I so upset over a bad grade? अगर एक B+ आ गया क्या बड़ी बात है? Today, whatever, 15 years later, I don't even remember the name of that title of that course, let alone ever in my life ever using that. So why is it that now I can be like this, and when you are here, why couldn't I be like this then? Is because, well, the brain is qualitatively very different in you right now. Your brain is probably more reactive than mine right now. There can be lots of individual differences, but generally where you're at right now, that's the time of your brain where your brain is going to probably resist authority. You're in that phase of the development of your brain where your brain is reckless. Your brain is going to be very hyper-rational. Just the other day, someone was just really making a very hyper-rational argument with me why they should die. I couldn't contest that. Their reasons were really good. They were saying, well, I am right now a student. I will graduate from here. फिर क्या होगा? I'll go to another grade. फिर क्या होगा? I'll go to a university. इतनी मेहनत करूँगा फिर क्या होगा? Job मिलेगी. Job करूँगा फिर क्या होगा? I'll get married. फिर क्या होगा? I'll have kids. फिर क्या होगा? I'll one day feed them. फिर क्या होगा? One day I'll die. So what's the point? How do you explain that to someone? That's really hyper rational, and that's really risky. You could be that clear when you want to kill yourself. So that's, if anything, when we're talking about mental health, I want to connect it with where I started from. When we're talking about the conceptualization of mental health and what can we do and what happens at this age, a very big problem is that this is the age where a lot of things could start from. We have some some symptoms that could be showing up right now. If we can deal with them right now, they'll probably not become bigger problems. But if we let them brew, they'll become bigger problems. That doesn't mean we can't resolve them later, but that means they become more difficult, they become more resistant to our work, and probably you'll be in therapy for longer. So at this age, I'd be very cautious about certain things. If you have people around you who are feeling suicidal, who have those tendencies, who do feel that life is too difficult, and then they're finding it difficult to live, I'm going to give you some things to be watching out, and this could really save someone's life. So some of the things that I'd be very mindful of, if someone is sharing with you that life is not making sense and they don't wish to live, don't contest that. If you contest that with them and try to tell them that, well, life is good and it's rainbows and butterflies and it's got to, how can you say like this? That's not helpful. Second thing, they've already thought out that argument, which is that hum dozakh mein jayenge if we kill ourselves. They've already thought that. You're saying that to them is just going to make them even feel more burdened with that, and if anything, that's not very helpful. So what can we do? And what are the things that we're looking for? First things first, if someone is sharing that ideation with you, that life is not making sense, research seems to indicate that asking them questions about it is not going to push them over the edge. Don't ask them judgmental questions, but you can always ask them that, okay, tell me more. Why are you feeling this way? What's happening? What's your experience? I'm interested. I'm listening to you. You have my attention. I'll leave everything. Just tell me what's happening with you. Another thing that a lot of times you will notice is that someone who's suicidal, their substance use may go up. That can sometimes be a telltale sign. A lot of times they're feeling very purposeless. They feel that life is not making sense. Kya point hai? Padhai kya karni hai karke? Grades kya karne hai aake? Any of this doesn't make sense. Why does anything matter anyway? So there's a sense of complete, utter purposelessness. There may be anxiety, where a person may at all times feel that there may be a dread that something bad could happen at any point, and I'm just unable to rest. I'm unable to calm down, and I'm unable to stop my thoughts. There can be a feeling of being trapped, that I'm stuck. I want to kill myself, but religion won't allow. Or what about my family? But if I had it my way, I'd just die. I just don't want to wake up. If a car hit me right now, I'd be grateful for that. If I could just die, that'll just ease my misery. So there's a feeling of being trapped right now. Then there may be a lot of hopelessness. Hopelessness is usually something that's a construct about the future, which is that how am I extending myself in the next one day, week, year, life generally, is a hopelessness, which is that it won't ever improve. Where I am, it's going to be more of the same. I feel bad, hence I'll continue to feel bad. If I'm surrounded by toxic people, I'll always have toxic people. If I'm lonely, if I don't have friends, I'll never have friends. So there's a sense of loneliness and hopelessness. There's a general withdrawal that people are receding. That's also a telltale sign. They're not engaging with people. They're closing themselves off. There are a lot of times there's very explosive anger. They may even do very reckless acts, such as harming someone, hurting someone, things which may even be uncharacteristic because they're trying to feel something. They feel so numb, they don't feel anything, so they may be even trying to be explosive sometimes just to experience something. And lastly, there could be some form of very extreme and drastic mood changes as well. Including a lot of times people report about someone who's just killed themselves that, but they seem just fine. They may have been depressed a few months or weeks ago, but when we met them last week, they were really happy and they were really looking forward to life and they were really talking about those things. That may sometimes just be a sign in itself. So I know that this is this is not your job as a young adult yourself to be diagnosing people, but this is a simple understanding of it, that if there is someone who's reporting that they're depressed and you see some of these things in them, maybe that would be a good idea for you to get them help. This can really save lives. Usually my take right immediately at that point is that they need to see a psychiatrist. If someone is at a risk for killing themselves, talk therapy may not help. in itself. So I want to first send a person to a psychiatrist as soon as possible. There's a possibility if they're overusing substances, that may also kill them. So we want to be very cautious about it. If someone expresses something about killing themselves, I always take that seriously. I never want to disregard it. That's a professional responsibility for me, because otherwise that's on me. But my message to you guys is the same, which is that if someone expresses that, whether they've said it lightly and they may later say, oh, I was just kidding. I don't take that as that. I take that seriously, and I hope that you can do that too. So that's a piece that I thought that I'd talk about, reasons and some of the most severe conditions. When we come to other mental health problems such as depression or anxiety, they may also follow a certain course. This age group that you're in is usually considered to be a vulnerable age. It seems like that half of the cases of depression and anxiety first evidence themselves before the age of 14. There are already telltale signs, but we miss them entirely. So when there's a child who continually is just crying, the child who continually doesn't want to go to school, or they seem to have other gastric issues, or they're continually just scared, or they have nightmares, or they can't sleep, or they withdraw, or they're too lonely and they don't have friends. A lot of these things mean something. They may not count as symptoms which we may use to diagnose someone with a disorder as yet, but these are telltale signs. If something can be done about it, in the trajectory, I can tell you, anyone and everyone that I work with who are adults, people between 35 to 65, whenever I'm looking at any of the determinants of depression and anxiety, we always go way back. We always see that somewhere it was already happening. It was happening when they were much younger. So if something could have been done about it right then, possibly the mental health outcomes of that could have been better. I'm not saying it could have been avoided, but possibly an early intervention could have even been preventative, and we may change the course of how even genes express themselves. That's also something in the last 25 years we've been very interested in. That's epigenetics, which is that how do genes express themselves in environments. Bad environments, the parts of your genetics which are possibly all of us carry bad genes from our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, back to maybe the first common human ancestor. We are a collection of all the genes of everyone around us. So you're probably carrying cancers and cholesterol and diabetes and mental health problems from maybe at least more so in the last 2 to 3 generations. So your nana, nani, dada, dadi, and the 8 great grandparents, whatever family things there are, you're carrying them already. Now, bad enough environments meet me, I'm deprived, I don't get enough nutrition, my environment is neglectful, I'm traumatized at an early age, I'm a victim of childhood sexual abuse. The expression of those genes is going to be in those adverse environments. Whereas if genetically I don't have those predispositions, I could even be in bad environments and I may never develop those illnesses. So it's a very common sight that we'd see that returning soldiers, they may be someone who's lost their arm or their limb. They may not go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, but it may be someone who's actually witnessed them who may go on to develop PTSD. How do you explain that? There's someone who's actually gone through the trauma and they seem to be okay in life. And there's someone who just viewed them and that person is affected by it. And then there are people who've never been to a battlefield, who've just literally seen that on the TV and they go on to develop PTSD. And that's real. So I'm not making that up, which is that there are people who are hundreds and thousands of people who are diagnosed by these conditions just because they viewed graphic content. They never were anywhere near a battlefield. They've never met someone who's been on the battlefield, but just being exposed to that content could be enough for them to develop trauma symptoms. So that also has to do with how our genes are expressing themselves. And we also know another thing, which is that genes can, just like they can be switched on, genes can also be switched off. And that is something that we have again discovered in the recent decades, which is called neuroplasticity. That our brain, throughout its lifespan, from birth till you die, our brain is plastic, it's flexible, it can change. And what changes our brain are actually experiences. So the fodder for the brain literally are experiences. If bad fodder goes in, your brain develops badly and it's not going to be resilient. Things will happen in your life, you're unable to cope with them, you'll be overwhelmed, and that further takes you into bad experiences. You feel worse about yourself. When you feel worse about yourself, you create a worse brain. That worse brain doesn't support your health. You get sick. It seems like people with mental health disturbances on an average will go on to die 15 or 20 years earlier than healthy people. So now at this point, actually we're taking this seriously. It's not just something that some of us think, but this is something that there's an overall agreement at this point in the unified experience of the body, mind, and the brain, that these three they co-create themselves. They're continually interacting with each other, and if we were to even reverse the tide of that can't happen without a holistic approach. So what do these holistic approaches look like? So maybe let me talk about some of those things. Okay, before I go on, how are we doing so far? Is it too much of my talking? No? Are you needing something? Is there any question at this point? Should I go on? Okay, alright. Okay, if you say so. Alright, so what can we do? What can you do? If you are someone who's saying, well, you know what, I feel bad about myself sometimes, but I don't feel bad enough that I am going to go seek help. So what are some of those things that you as an individual can be mindful of? What can you be doing at this point? So it seems like we call these things therapeutic lifestyle changes. That's a very fancy term, TLCs. That these TLCs are things which are a part of preventative strategies. When we say that if we don't want to take you to the place where you need an intervention and you actually have a diagnosable psychological illness, then what can we do? Today, between today and 5 years later, when you will actually be in trouble, what can we be doing in the meanwhile? So one of these things is exercise. Simple logic. More oxygenated blood, better functioning of your brain, better functioning of your brain, better functioning of your body, better functioning of your body, better creation of the brain, and that process just continues to get reinforced by each other. So exercise seems to be an important determinant. There's a recent study that by Fitbit that seemed to indicate that, and that's obviously an average, but they seem to say that between 120 to 150 minutes of exercise is enough in a week. So you don't need to be doing gym every day. You don't need to be doing even the gym. You just need to be doing a brisk walk for 20-25 minutes, 4 days a week, 5 days a week. That's enough. 120 minutes of exercise, it needs to be enough to stimulate your body. It can't be that, oh, I'm taking a leisurely walk with my friend while using my phone and we're talking. It needs to be with it can't be, oh, मैं तो इस auditorium के आगे पीछे हम फिरते रहते हैं. मैंने 120 minutes पूरे दिन में. That's not, you don't have the intent. You're not doing it for that purpose. It has to be with the intent that I'm actually doing this for my own self. Take that time out for yourself. In my time at LUMS, we used to have a lot more open spaces, but I'm sure you can figure out some pathways between LUMS where you can maybe, one good measure is 10,000 steps a day. All of our phones come with a pedometer that counts the steps you've taken in a day. If you can't do 10,000, start with 6,000. That's not a lot. That's barely 20-25 minutes of brisk walk a day. That's one. Another is media immersion. Just look up your phones, how much you use your phone every day. You'd see that the average is probably, I just looked at mine, my weekly average was something like 25 hours in a week. So a whole day in my week, out of my 7 days, one whole day I was actually on my phone. And we have preliminary data coming in that's extremely harmful. So so with your social media, there are two things that's done. There's a hyper reality and there's a hyper proximity of that, which is really messing with your brain. Now, 50 years ago, if you wanted to get in touch with someone, you had to, I'm presuming, let me be dramatic, write to them, and then that letter will be posted, and then someone will pick it up the next day, and someone will walk there to send it to them, and then they'll read it, and then they'll write it. There was a lag of 5 days in between when you could say, I hate you, and then they send the message back that I hate you too. But now you do that instantly. And then beyond that, it's 100 times a day that your brain is getting that hit, that emotional hit again and again. If it's not that, Just imagine if 50 years ago, what's happening between India and Pakistan, 50 years ago, you and I won't be that stressed. Because if you're not hearing planes above, and maybe we've just read the news, we'd probably be going about our business as usual. But now we get the footage for it, and we get to see that here is what this person is saying, and then someone has to say something else about it, and then there are a million tweets about it, and then there is a celebrity who says something about it, and we get hit by it a lot. And that media immersion seems to have an impact on the human brain. It's never happened in the human history that we have ever been so close to people. We've had so much data coming in, and that seems to be, I don't have a better way to say it, it's frying up our brain. So when you say then I feel numb and I don't know what to do with my life and I'm bored and I can't attend to things and I can't focus, I try to open my book, that's so boring, I want to check who's doing what with their lives. That's because obviously that's more attractive. That's attractive. I mean, if someone who's been on, I hope that there aren't too many of you, but someone who's been on drugs, when you tell them to be not on drugs, it's the same thing. When they're not on drugs, it's boring. They just don't know what to do with themselves. Because the state of mind that they can enjoy while being in an altered state of consciousness, when you try to mimic a neutral sense of self, a non-toxicated sense of self, it will never match. And hence you will try to recreate it just to withdraw, to do it again, just to withdraw, just to do it again, just to withdraw. And that's what causes addictions. So we seem to be creating an addiction which probably in another 20 years, we'd get to know that, oh, this is problematic. But we already have preliminary data coming in that it's highly problematic. So what can you do? You're not going to leave your Facebook, or I'm not going to leave Facebook either. But maybe try to take some breaks. Don't use your social media at least an hour before you're sleeping, because that stimulates your brain. And then when you try to sleep, your brain can't rest. So when you say, oh, there are so many thoughts going in my head, why are they going in my head? It's because your brain is overstimulated. It's not going to calm down on its own. And which I'm going to connect with the other good therapeutic lifestyle change, which is sleep. You can literally do that right now. I mean, I remember in LUMS, which is that we would have all-nighters, or agle din subah 7 baje assignment hai, raat ko 2 baje shuru karo, 7 baje de do. You can still do it. Your brain is going to support it. Good luck with doing it 15 years later.